Oh, wow. Hey, much love and respect to everybody tuned in. Thanks for tuning in with me one more time. Um, Before I begin today's video, since we're going right back into a subject we were talking about before, we haven't talked about in a while. I haven't gone into this book in a while. I just want to remind everybody I have a lot of new people, so I have to repeat things a lot so people not confused when I'm reading the information for today. Um, what I have here on the screen is my playlist, which is Origin of the Nations of the World. Right now, there's 34 videos there. I highly recommend it if you haven't, if you're new, especially in regards to today's topic, which is the original Pilgrims, the original Puritans who settled in Massachusetts colony, and who they were, their genealogical history. A lot of them were Sephardic Jews and Moors, Moorish people, people of color. This is part four, what I have here on the screen, Nations of the World video, where we used showed a lot of sources letting us know that the Jews of Portugal and Spain were very dark. This is from the Natural History of Man, just one example I have on the screen. And as you can see here, the Jews of Portugal are very dark, right? The Jews of Portugal are very dark. That's Natural History of Man, third edition. This is the book Shakespeare and the Jews. When William Barrington jotted down his impressions of the Jews in the synagogue in Amsterdam in 1635, he noted that the Jewish men are most black and insatiably given unto women, drawn here on contemporary prejudices linking blackness and licentiousness. And when the Scottish minister Robert Kirk toured London in January 1690, he also paid a visit to the synagogue there, where he observed over 200 Jews worshiping. He noted in his journal that they were all very black men and instinct in their residence as gypsies. All right, just like the gypsies. I got a future video, it's gonna be great about the gypsies. All right, it all, I have to put out certain info first because then we won't make sense. But now that we got the Chaldean video out and all these Sephardic, Moorish, and Black European videos out, we have a clearer understanding. We have many references of the Gypsies being very, very, very dark complexioned. All right, the original Gypsies or Egyptians. All right. So again, that was another source. It says here a system of geography or a descriptive historical and philosophical view of the several quarters of the world. All right, that's a book we're going through here. So they're talking about the different colors of the different Jews. It says here they are known never to intermarry with any but those of their own sect, and notwithstanding this, it is argued we find them in different parts of the world of all colors. All colors. The English Jew is white, the Portuguese Jew swarty, the American Jew olive, and the Rabbi Jew copper colored. All right. Again, Portuguese and Spanish were what? Swarty. They were so-called black. Black. Jews come in all colors. This is from the book Jews and Blacks in the Early Modern World. There's also a vulgar error that the Jews are all black, for this is only true of the Portuguese, right, or the Spanish, right? The Portuguese who marrying always among one another beget children like themselves, and consequently the swartiness of their complexion is entailed upon their whole race. A little further down in the same book, it says here the Jews are fair in Britain and Germany, brown in France and Turkey, swarty in Turkey and in Portugal and Spain, right? We're talking about Portuguese and Spanish Jews, right? Swarty, black, and olive in Syria and in Chaldea. Where's the real Chaldea now? We know, right? Tawny or copper colored in Arabia and Egypt, all right? But again, the Spanish and Portuguese, Swarty. I also showed this in this video, Arabi Moor, which is the official title for the chief rabbi of Portugal from the 13th century. Why would it be called a Moor? Why would they be calling the chief rabbi a Moor or Rabbi Moor? And that's the chief title. So again, conclusion, in this video, shout out to Genesis 49ers, this is his slide, says Sephardic Jews of old were reputed as being black. The Sephardic Jews were sold as slaves and expelled from Spain and Portugal. Their descendants were purported to be black. They had various communities in the New World, Americas, which was originally black, until a large influx of white German and Eastern Jews migrated into America. Jews left Brazil and went to New Amsterdam and New York. That's the Dutch that came. That was the supposed Dutch. The early Sephardic Jews of the 15th, 16th, and 17th century were in fact black, so-called black, people of color, so-called Negro. All right, so now that we got that out the way, again, make sure to watch the whole video, not just that one, but part 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 when it comes to the Sephardic history. Again, Nations of the World series. Again, these are great videos. Make sure to watch all the parts. And again, we read from many chapters of the book. We're going to read today. We're in chapter 4, so we read from the previous chapters in this video. So make sure to get this series if you have not. So again, when we're reading today's book and we're reading about Sephardic Jews, we already know, we already showed numerous sources, many correlations to know that these were people of color. Just want to remind everybody, especially the new people that we have. Hard to believe. Yeah, I know. But yeah, so we're gonna get into the video. I thought this picture was funny. I found it. I just put black pilgrims and this popped up. But what I was really looking for was some other info, and I just happened to run into some articles here. But we gotta dodge the hijack because they're gonna add their narratives. All right. So I found this article here. It says Black Pilgrim stirs controversy 30 years on. I mean, I listened to the audio. I just couldn't take much of it because they had their African narratives and all that stuff, and their reasoning is so it's just so pseudo. I can't believe they think they're scholars. So it says here WBUR, right? .org. It says here, was there black pilgrim breaking bread with the Puritans in the 1620s? What Puritans? What if I told you the Puritans were also black? The question caused a huge controversy in the 1980s when the Plymouth Plantation in Plymouth, Mass. Hired a black actor to portray a pilgrim. So it says here, see a 1981 Boston Globe photo of the actor portraying the black pilgrim. This is the picture here on pbs.org. Boston Globe picture, and that's him playing a black pilgrim. So people's gonna have their opinions about why they hired him, right? We all know the truth, and we're gonna, basically correlate that today and prove it. It says here, the plantation reproduces the Pilgrim's 17th century village, complete with period buildings, food, and role-playing interpreters who speak as though it were 1627. In 1981, Bob Martin was the museum's director of programs. He said that the museum had begun receiving federal funds and that required them to advertise an equal opportunity employer. All right, so they say, oh, we gotta hire so-called blacks too, or so-called African Americans, right? So a so-called African American applied for a role playing a job. All right, dodge the hijack, and Martin hired him. He said there had been black people in Plymouth at the time of the Pilgrims, so it seemed logical. All right, Martin knew what he was talking about. But some historians and descendants of Pilgrims balked. Somebody got mad. Somebody got their feelings hurt. No, what are you talking about? And the museum decided if there was going to be a black pilgrim at the museum, he had to be based on a real person. Martin said that for more than 100 years, historians had referenced a black pilgrim named Abraham Pierce. Pierce. We're going to read about that surname today, I believe. Pierce, Sephardic Moorish surname, who came to Plymouth in 1623. The Blackamoor. Martin did some research and found an entry in 1861 publication, Records of the Colony of New Plymouth in New England, 1633 and 1689, that read, Abraham Pierce, the Blackamoor. Blackamoor was a term for a black person in those days. All right, look at this. All right, August 1643, the names of all the males that are able to bear arms from. All right, you see this? Abraham Pierce the Blackamoor. Now, he was the only one being called Blackamoor, but that doesn't mean anybody else here wasn't so-called black. That's where they don't, understand a more correct history here. All right, an excerpt from Records of the Colony of New Plymouth in New England, 1633-1689, edited by Nathaniel B. Smirlett, MD, lists Abraham Pierce the Blackamoor. A number of historians with experience examining the records have looked at it over the years, and without exception that we know of, they would concur that he was a black man, Martin said. But Martin said some descendants of Abraham Pierce did not concur. Oh, I wonder which ones. Could it be the so-called white ones? And Again, I'm gonna tell you guys this, and I'm gonna tell anybody listening right now. A lot of so-called white people descend from so-called black people, especially the farther in history in America you go, because most of them go right into Europe right away, or Ellis Island. The ones who don't, hey, I'm not, you can prove it doing your genealogy and then studying the genealogical history of these people you're going back to. Even if it says white on census, a lot of them, especially with these Hebrew names we're going to read today, a lot of them were Sephardic and Moorish people. All right. It says, Martin said, one of these descendants said to me, you took all the fun out of being a pilgrim descendant. It was a thing of great pride to be related to the nobility. And if these pilgrims, if some of them were black men, then that prestige, all the fun of being a descendant of a pilgrim is gone. You see what he said? That's so racist. So now the pilgrims were nobles, right? Who said the pilgrims were ever nobles? Nobility, first of all. So now he don't got the pride anymore, because now he found out they were so-called black men as pilgrims too. Oh, so it's not any more fun anymore. No more prestige. That's very, very prejudiced and racist. I don't think man, I don't even know why they would even correct him and tell him, hey, that was kind of racist, sir. It says here, additional research. The museum decided additional information was needed, and they brought in other museum researchers, including Jim Baker, to investigate. Martin had based his case on the 1861 publication, but it turns out that the book was a transcription of a slew of colonial records. Baker found the original 1643 document and found that it read differently. On one line was the name Abraham Pierce, and under his name, not next to it, read the words the Blackamoor. All right, so it's still there. Baker interpreted that to mean there were actually two men, Abraham Pierce and an unidentified black man. So now they're going into conjecture. Either way, there's still a black man there, right? They just said it. They're still admitting there was a so-called black man in the pilgrim list, right? Pierce appears in the colonial record at least 30 times, Baker said. He married someone who was obviously part of the regular community. What do you mean, regular community? What does that mean? You understand how they're writing this with their racist, all Europeans are white views, and all so-called black people are from Africa? His children continue on and have descendants. There's never any mention that he was noticeably black. Hey, like I said, we're about to open Pandora's box. A lot of people's about to be hurt. A lot of people's going to find out a lot of things that they never would have imagined. And again, a lot of white folks descend from black folks, especially the more history they got in America. Who was the original Europeans that were coming? We're about to see. We already broke it down in the past videos regarding, the Swarthy Europeans, Sephardic Jews, the Huguenots, Protestants, the Palatines, all that, Black Irish, and we're still gonna keep doing a lot more. I'm not even halfway done. Nope. So I wanted to read this to you. Of course, they're gonna talk about the DNA trail, right? So they did a DNA, and this is funny, because look at how they reason. Look at their conclusions why he couldn't have been black. I'm gonna read it to you. It says, fast forward to the 21st century, we now live in the age of CSI, where sophisticated DNA tests could put this controversy to rest. In fact, amateur genealogist and radiologist Dr. Brad Pierce of Little Rock, Arkansas, has reviewed DNA tests of two Abraham Pierce descendants. We can say with virtual certainty that the father of Abraham and his ancestors of the male Pierce line are not of African descent. So check this out, because they're not going back to Africa now all of a sudden. Well, who's telling you he was African? Who said he was African? Just because, see, now they're talking about just because of color. Everybody's supposed to be from Africa, right? So because it didn't match, oh, look, this is our proof. He's not African. Well, duh, right? What do we know in this community? That not all so-called black people come from Africa, right? Right? So of course he's not gonna go back to an African gene. So you see how they covered their tracks. This goes way back. They knew this would happen. They knew, oh, well, let's prove it with DNA then. They knew it because they already told you you're all from Africa. So nobody's even looking at any possibility of any European being an indigenous black and European. Had nothing to do with Africa. Many of them. All right, so their conclusions, you see, this is so pseudo. This is so like really, and then we have to go down to their level to try to debate and prove and stuff. And this is, they're just basing everything on colors, crayon colors, and generalizations and theories, right? Out of Africa, what? Theory. So now we go off theories, right? Theories that also include you coming out of apes. It goes together. You believe in out of Africa, then you believe what Darwin told you, that you came from apes, and that's false. You know, there was people of color all over the world. They didn't all come out of Africa. And again, this is not to disrespect Africa or Africans. Nope. That's only, if you take it like that, that's because right now the truth is hurting you. But we're about to read a genealogical history. We already got sources. We already know in my 3 Swarty Euro videos, and that's, I mean, I could do part 4, 5, 6, and we got the anthropological books. We know the early Europeans. Oh, I didn't make up Cheddar Man, right? What is Cheddar Man? I didn't make this up. I'm not the one saying this. Cheddar Man, right? Hey, Cheddar Man, what's up? They say that's the first European right there. That's what the first European looked like. That's what they're saying, right? He looked a little copperish, right? And then check this out. Who's this? So I'm not the one saying or trying to hijack anybody's history or culture. This here 9,000-year-old woman shared features with Cheddar Man. Look at her complexion. As experts have reconstructed the face of a woman who lived in Spain 9,300 years ago, who appears to have been similar to Cheddar Man, suffered from toothache and died in a cave and collapsed. All right, study her. The face of Elba, the Mesolithic woman. All right, Cheddar Man and her. I'm not the one saying it. So just because somebody may look like this and their DNA is not going back to Africa, that doesn't disprove anything. That's just silly. You see? That's just pseudo. That's silly. Everybody didn't come out of Africa. The Washington Post. At Thanksgiving, the search for a black pilgrim among Plymouth settlers. Say what? Was one of the Plymouth colony settlers a black man? So-called black. The search for a black pilgrim began decades ago. Then in 1981, historians announced with great fanfare that they had finally found enough evidence that one early settler was indeed of Dutch the hijack, that he was of color, he was dark complexion. They're adding the African. Remember, they did a DNA test to his ancestor. It didn't go back to Africa. That man was included in 1643 record listed the names of men able to serve in Plymouth, Mass militia. He was identified as Abraham Pierce Blackamoor. In those days, a blackamoor, derivative of blackmoor, was a term used to describe someone with dark skin. Blackmoors had roots in North Africa and often worked as servants or enslaved people in Europe. Dodge the hijack, because they drop a little truth, then they add the narratives. They're not just servants, all right? And they didn't just originate in North Africa either. Dodge the hijack. This is real. They admitted it. So we're about to read today. You know, empty your cup and try to gain some new understanding. All right, so I wanted to come back and continue reading from this book. Great book. We've learned a lot of correlation in it when it comes to a more true, a more correct genealogical history of European colonists or just European themselves, you know, indentured servants, prisoners of war, conquistadors, and so on. And again, the book is Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, a Genealogical History by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. And so we go to chapter 4. Yeah, we're already in chapter 4. We've read the previous 3 chapters, the introduction and the prelude in previous videos. Told everybody we're going to go ahead and make sure to get through this book, even if it's chapter by chapter. A lot of great drop in each chapter. So here we go. We're in chapter 4. We're going to continue. It says Massachusetts, Pilgrims, Puritans, Jews, and Moors. The outline of early Massachusetts history is familiar to most Americans. The first settlers arrived on the Mayflower in 1620 with the Pilgrims. The Puritans followed within a decade, setting up the towns of Salem in 1628 under John Endicott and Boston in 1630 under John Winthrop. In that same year, Massachusetts Bay Colony was founded. It absorbed the former colony, brought a large amount of self-government. Within the next decade came more than 20,000 immigrants, almost entirely British, it is said, with East Anglians setting the tone. Counties were formed that echoed the rural regions of England: Hampshire, Berkshire, Essex, Middlesex, Suffolk, and Norfolk. Although the northern hilly land of dense forests, stony soils, and a short growing season bore little resemblance to the Puritans' land of origin, farming became the main enterprise of the colony. When the new inhabitants' hard work and zeal had tamed the wilderness, towns with sturdy Anglo-Saxon names like Cambridge, Bristol, Springfield, Salisbury, Boston, Andover, Dorchester, Framingham, Gloucester, dotted the countryside with their typical green commons, trim fields surrounded by fences, and peaceful church spires. When one thinks of Massachusetts, one conjures up images of devout men and women clothed in sad, subdued colors, carrying Bibles and walking solemnly to church on Sunday. Or maybe one envisions the first Thanksgiving, in which these same cheerlessly dressed men and women are gathered around long trencher tables with friendly Indians partaking of wild turkey, venison, corn, potatoes, and jams. Such is the nostalgic mythology of early America. To describe the founding forefathers and foremothers, the author of one standard account, R.C. Simmons, uses the words pious, good, godly, Calvinistic, poor, learned, stead and orderly, saintly, disciplined, and most revealingly homogeneous. According to another author, David Hackett Fisher, one of the foremothers, wears a sad brown dress, and her image combines the strength, resolve, seriousness, dignity, virtue, and gravitas typical of the Puritans. Fisher stipulates that this small uniform group of settlers grew into a regnant population that has essentially lasted to the present day. The immigrants who came to Massachusetts in the Great Migration became the breeding stock for America's Yankee population. They multiplied at a rapid rate, doubling every generation for 2 centuries. Their numbers increased to 100,000 by 1700, to at least 1 million by 1800, 6 million by 1900, and more than 16 million by 1988. All descended from 21,000 English immigrants who came to Massachusetts in the period between 1629 to 1640. All right, so dodge the hijack with the, whitewashing. It says social historians contrast the simple rural folkways and purposefulness of Massachusetts families with the middle Atlantic colonies settled by frivolous cavaliers, gambling, all on adventure and independent-minded bachelors, right? Bachelors, right? So they needed wives, right? They took on women, right? These bachelors, what women do you think they took on? Many took on American indigenous wives. All right, we're going to see we already know what this book's about. We know when we're talking about these early Europeans, who they really were. So bachelors running away from responsibilities. Most commentators point to the middle-class, pragmatic nature of the Puritans and emphasized their religious mission to purify the Protestant faith in a new setting where privileged and medieval tradition counted for less than individualism and good works. All right, they are Protestants. Remember who the Protestants were mainly? A lot of these people, again, crypto, Sephardic, Jewish, Moorish people. One might ask, however, what the reformers sought to purify society of and what drove them to withdraw into their own secret congregations in England and the Netherlands, and then take the unusual step of immigrating to a raw, empty wilderness. Why did they do all that? The focus on purity reminds us of contemporary Spain, with its obsessions about pure bloodedness and heresy. What radical bent made the Puritan authorities impose a new system of rule and oppression, forcing many autonomous separatist congregations to steadily splinter in their beliefs and practices? What caused the breakaway settlements soon launched in Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, and Nova Scotia? And why, anyway, did people join in this effort to plant a colony in the bleak cold north, devoid of any promise of crops, minerals, or valuable exports other than perhaps fish and timber? All right, and that's a very good question that nobody ever seemed to ask. Why would they go and start a colony in Massachusetts? Why? An alternative image of Massachusetts begins to emerge. If one is bold enough to discard the preconceptions, all right, you gotta empty your cup, your preconceptions and your beliefs, and dig deeper into the original records of the time, probing the historical backdrop in England and the Netherlands, all right, Holland. The great majority of the passengers on the Mayflower were not actually pilgrims in the first place, all right? They weren't actually pilgrims. Only 35 of the original 102 passengers were from the congregation in Leyden. The rest were miscellaneous persons picked up in London and Southampton. All right, listen, miscellaneous, not everybody was a so-called pilgrim. They don't tell you all this stuff. Out of 102 people, only 30? That's less than half the people on the ship. The financier behind the voyage was the merchant Thomas Weston, English Jewish surname. Weston, a merchant. Who's the merchants? With this and other similar considerations, the pilgrim mothers and fathers may not end up so dowdy and redundant after all. Their complexions become darker than previously envisioned. Boom. Their complexions become darker than previously envisioned. Wow, he just straight up, he went right to the point, being very subliminal what he's saying, but very literal at the same time. Yeah, their complexions became darker. These were people of color. All right, empty your cup. Welcome to the truth. Many of the conscripts for Massachusetts appeared to be what we call today persons of color. Again, many of the conscripts for Massachusetts appeared to be what we call today persons of color. They came from North African, Semitic, and Mediterranean ancestry and preserved distinctly non-Christian religious traditions. Gradually, we begin to suspect that one of the strongest motivations uniting this disparate throng of settlers was the resolve to escape certain institutions in the old world that they galvanized around such enemies as popery and economic oppression. All right, letting you know these people were being forced, a lot of them. Remember, they told us the stories. They were fleeing from religious persecution, but who was, and from who? All right, when you actually go into the history, you see it was Catholics, the Vatican Catholics, the Holy Roman Empire was going after the Gentiles, right? Or those who didn't want to be, Catholics or Christians or follow Jesus, right? Like Jews and Moors or Muslims, all right? So they had to become crypto or secret Jews or crypto secret Muslims, remember? The common denominator was a resurgence of Crypto-Judaism, all right? A Crypto Crypto-Judaism, a long dormant strain in English society, fanned into life again through the influence of Spanish and Portuguese Jews taking refuge in the British Isles and Low Countries. Remember, after their diaspora, when the Jews and the Moors got expelled from Spain and Portugal, they didn't just go to North Africa. We got the drop already. A lot of them ended up in different parts of Europe. The British Isles and the Low Countries was one of the places, or a few of the places. Before we continue, I want to go to a video that's going to correlate what the guy was saying about of the passengers of the Mayflower, who they were really. And did you know, like, more than half of them were indentured servants? Like you said, he was just picking up people here from London and Southampton. So let's get that video real quick, and then we'll come right back to the book.
This is the story of the Mayflower, actually, of the Pilgrim voyage. On 3 days before they, or 2 or 3 days before they landed, the majority of the people there, over 50%, were indentured servants. And they staged a revolt on board. And what came out of it is the famous document known as the Mayflower Compact, where all the people there were declared themselves equal, free and equal. They revolted against the form of servitude that most of them had been committed, had signed up to put themselves under. And through a revolt of revolutionary servants, the first New England colony, Plymouth, became a democracy of sorts. It was a limited democracy, but it was the most democratic society at that time in colonial America. Well, in the colonies, the most of the colonies, or all of the British colonies, were really set up by corporations. And as soon as possible, people who were hooked into it, who were often indentured servants, where they signed up for passage for a certain number of years, they would have to work off the money that the passage cost, and then they were able to get off on their own. And as soon as they got out, many of them just ran away from that form of bondage, and went off into the wilderness.
All right, so again, we continue in the book Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, a Genealogical History. And we're in chapter 4, remember? We're going to continue where we left off. It says here, William Bradford. And again, dodge the hijack on the whitewashing images, because they're letting you know the drop here. Remember that their complexions became darker than previously envisioned. We're talking about Moors and Sephardic Jews. William Bradford. The new version begins like the old, with the writing of the founding fathers, foremost a history composed by William Bradford, first governor of Plymouth Plantation in 1647. Bradford was born in 1590 at Austerfield, Yorkshire, and he joined the Congregational Church there in 1606. Later, he moved to Leiden in the Netherlands, where he learned Dutch, Latin, and Hebrew. He and his Dutch wife, Dorothy May, Jewish surname, sailed to North America aboard the Mayflower, which landed in December 1620. In Plymouth, Bradford supported his family through fur trading with the Indians, all right? Setting up stores in Buzzards Bay and Kennebec. With his death in May 1657, Bradford left furniture and clothing, including a red turkey grogram suit of clothes, a red waistcoat with silver buttons, and an old violet colored cloak, and 2 hats, a black one and a colored one. The will of Jane Humphrey in 1668 makes mention of a scarlet petticoat worn beneath the matron's gray exterior. So much, at least, for the drab taste and killjoy nature of the Pilgrims, huh? Morrison states that the Bradford's history opens with folios occupied by Bradford's Hebrew exercises, which he wrote in circa 1650 in Hebrew. This is what he wrote in Hebrew. Listen, this is a post-Pilgrim, right? Though I am grown aged, yet I have had a longing desire to see with my own eyes something of that most ancient language and holy tongue, in which the law and oracles of God were writ, and in which God and angels spake to the holy patriarchs of all time, and what names were given to things from the creation. And though I cannot attain to much herein, yet I am refreshed to have seen some glimpses hereof, as Moses saw the land of Canaan afar off. My aim and desire is to see how the words and phrases lie in the holy text. All right, so that's deep. Is he talking about glimpses when he's meaning the Indians? Is that what he's talking about? An ancient language? He's glad he actually saw, or was he really talking about? Thus, Bradford was most interested in the Torah and Nevi'im, the law and the prophets. This is surely a remarkable sentiment for a man widely perceived as a student of the New Testament and champion of the gospel. He's supposed to be a straight Christian, New Testament, nothing to do with Hebrew beliefs, or even supposed to be that into the Torah. In the same work, Bradford recounts how the French Walloons, remember the Walloons, a lot of those are Moors, were persecuted by the Catholics. All right, that's why they were being persecuted by the Catholics in the Netherlands, about which his editor comments in a footnote. Many thousand Protestants among the French-speaking Walloons, all right, Protestants and Walloons, immigrated across the border to the United Netherlands. Some of them joined the Christian church in Leiden. All right, so they joined this church, right, that eventually was one of the hosts of the 30 pilgrims that actually came. One of these was Philippe de la Noye, from Noé, French for Noah. All right, Noah, all right, that's the last name, who came to Plymouth in the fortune in 1621. This name anglicized as Delano. Oh, they made it Delano. It was actually Noah. You see, that has descended to a host of Americans, including President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Delanoye is a well-documented Sephardic surname, and this Protestant Delanoye's family was therefore likely crypto-Jewish. All right, real genealogical history. Bradford's history recounts how the Mayflower passengers were originally intended to settle in Virginia and carried letters from Sir Edwin Sandys and John Farrar to that effect. I remember he broke down Sandys and Farrar already. Farrar, Muslim name. Underwriter Thomas Weston issued them the Pierce Patent in June 1621 from the Council for New England, sponsored by the Dukes of Lennox and Hamilton, Earls of Warwick and Sheffield, and Sir Ferdinando Gorges or Jorges. Ultimately, they were swept off course or purposely misled to the North Atlantic coast, as will be established shortly. These men cannot be explained away as the pillars of English Christendom they might at first appear to be. Thomas Weston admitted that foreigners, strangers, had to be recruited to act as laborers and help defray its expenses. They came from London and Southampton, the first and second largest Jewish communities in England at the time. So listen what they were recruiting the so-called pilgrims from, the ones that weren't pilgrims, right? They came from London, and Southampton, that was a Jewish community at that time. Remember, he's talking about Sephardic Jews mostly. In the aftermath of the Indian massacre of the Jamestown settlers, the Plymouth settlers had built a fort by 1622. Virginian John Poree, the friend of Richard Halleck, who translated the first description of North Africa into English for Queen Elizabeth, had who bears what is probably a Moroccan surname, visited Plymouth. All right, that's a Moroccan surname. All right, so Poree, a Moroccan surname, Poree, Moor. And it says that this Poree visited Plymouth that year and wrote to Bradford a letter of gratitude for the hospitality extended to him. Bradford loaned Poree some books during his visit, described as Mr. Ainsworth's elaborate work upon the 5 books of Moses. These works continue the Hebrew Torah or Pentateuch, corresponding to Genesis through Deuteronomy in the Old Testament. Both he and Mr. Robinson do highly commend the authors as being most conversant in the scriptures. What good it may be please God to work by them through my hands, who find such high content in them. Many of the trade channels used by Massachusetts as well as Virginia were evidently Jewish, all right? Who owned the trade, who had the roots, who had the ports on lock. Remember the port Jews? Remember, let's not forget the previous videos, everything we've learned. Who was holding down the ships and the trade routes? Who was doing that since ancient times? Usually Sephardic or British, crypto-Jewish, or both. All right, that's who's holding down these trade channels used by Massachusetts and by Virginia. Marranos, all right, Marrano, was a Marrano? Was a Marrano, a converted Muslim into Christianity, a Moor, typically partnered with London merchants. All right, who's the merchants? The Sephardic Jews, same people who lent their names to the venture for appearance sake, as the Plymouth colonists set about trading with the Indians for furs and fish. They used 2 factors in London to sell their exports. Bradford reports of this arrangement. We appoint James Shirley Goldsmith and John Buchan, Salter, citizens of London, are true and lawful agents, factors, and assigns. Both these agents bear Sephardic surnames rooted in Anglo-Norman history and are in Jewish-dominated professions, all right? Beauchamp, Goldsmith, all right? We will encounter a Beauchamp or Beauchamp who is probably Jewish in a family in Maryland. Perhaps even more intriguing, given the stereotype of the Plymouth colony as deeply religious in character, in that it functioned entirely without the services of a Christian minister through 1635. They didn't even have one. In 15 years, remember, they got there in 1620, they didn't even have a Christian minister. The shepherd finally procured for the flock was named, intriguingly, Jose Glover, but the unfortunate man took ill and quickly died. After securing the services of the Reverend John Norton for about a year, the Pilgrim Church ultimately retained John Rayner or Rainer, Ranier, Raina, Sephardic. All right, that's a Sephardic last name. These are all people of color. Listen, who arrived in 1635 and remained until 1654. A final testimony with regard to Bradford's possible crypto-Jewish orientation is another of his addresses to the people of Israel, that is, the Pilgrims. It is drawn again from his history, written in 1646. Art thou a stranger in Israel, that thou shouldest not know what is done? Are not those Jebusites overcome that have vexed the people of Israel so long, these Jebusites, even holding Jerusalem till David's day, and been as thorns in their sides so many ages, and now begun to score, that any David should meddle with them, any David, any descendant of David? They began to fortify their tower as part of the old Babylonians, but those proud Anakins are thrown down, and their glory laid in the dust. The tyrannous bishops are ejected, their courts dissolved, their canons forceless, their service cashiered, their ceremonies useless and despised, their plots for potpourri prevented, and all their superstitions discarded, and returned to Rome, from whence they came, from Rome, and the monuments of idolatry rooted out of the land, and the proud and profane supporters and cruel defenders of these, as bloody papists and wicked atheists, and their malignant consorts marvelously overthrown, and are not these great things, who can deny it? Hallelujah. And again, these are Pilgrims. This is from 1646. Sentiments expressed in such passionate language bespeak a deeply embedded anti-Catholic hostility. We believe that only those whose ancestors had been forced from their homes, as the Sephardic Jews were in Spain, would exhibit such direct and forceful anger. By 1620, England was most emphatically not Catholic, and there was little to fear from Catholic influence. Bradford personally had not experienced the religious persecution necessary to ignite such vehemence. Although there are thousands of books on the subject of anti-Semitism, even unconscious, transferred, and sublimated forms of it, one is hard-pressed to find a single study of anti-Christian attitudes or anti-Catholicism in Jews or any other non-Christian group. That it was a persistent theme in Jewish life from the beginning of the persecution of the Jews by the Church of Rome in the early Middle Ages cannot be gainsaid. With the expulsion of Jews from Christian countries, England, right? Remember, this is what I was talking about earlier. The Jews had to go into hiding since 1290 in England, at least. France, 1306, Spain, 1390, and 1492, Portugal, 1497, province, 1501, Germany, 1426 to 1450 southern Italy, and 1541 again. And their concentration into ghettos, all right? Who was put in the ghettos? Who was in the ghettos today? Who's still in the ghettos? Things don't change. Venice was the first in 1515, but they lasted until Napoleon around 1800. Resentment against their oppressors built in the Jewish people of Europe. It was expressed as disparagement of the tenets of Christianity, including the doctrine of the Trinity, virgin birth, and Jesus as Messiah, as well as a criticism of all the pomp and ritual of the liturgy, saints' lives, and iconography. The Eucharist was marked as cannibalistic rite, right? You eat in the body of somebody, cannibalistic rite. Our Lady was called our stock, all right? And shout out to Drop Nation and the Dracons, because we got no blood in our cup, no blood in our cup. Again, the Eucharist was marked as cannibalistic rite. Our Lady was called our stock, and saints' images were denounced as heathen idolatry. It even extended to ridicule of the use of the name Mary or any patently a Catholic name like that of an evangelist or saint. So listen, this is what's really going on in these times. This is what these people coming into Europe, this is what they're feeling towards the Catholics, towards their persecution, towards the people that they are disagreeing with and being oppressed by. Jokes about the Pope, monks, priests and nuns, kneeling postures, ways of walking, haircuts, clothing, house colors, lovemaking, and cooking. A diabolical papist conspiracy was often glimpsed in the tiniest political rumor or trade news brought in by the ships, and the spectacle of Spain's decline and decadence did not go unnoticed. As 20th century Jewish historian Simon Dubnow commented, in tones probably not dissimilar from the contemporaries of William Bradford and William Penn, a people accustomed to the spectacle of the cannibalistic auto de fe succumbed to savagery. Manners grew steadily coarser. The healthy seed of religion was smothered into superstition and fanaticism. The flourishing land of the Arabic Judaic Renaissance was transformed into a lifeless desert of monks. Once, Spanish Jews themselves were relieved from the necessity of concealing ancestral sentiments by living in enemy states such as France, England, and the Netherlands. They tended to give open vent to anti-Spanish, anti-Catholic sympathies, at the same time maintaining a pride in the Castilian language and other aspects of Iberian culture and history. In the New World, many ingrained predispositions must have surfaced, even if transferred to the new circumstances and current events far removed from inquisitional Spain. Family traditions that were only whispered in France or England were repeated with less fear, as the Spanish emperor distinctly insisted that he enjoyed a higher ground in establishing dogma and enforcing laws against heresy as his Catholic Majesty than the Apostolic Church in Rome, presided over by Spanish popes and clergy through much of the 16th and 17th century, even as it was anti-Catholic and anti-Spanish. Feeling boiled up and became frequent theme of public discourse or private commentary. Spain's follies, pretensions, and ultimate ruin were the talk of Europe, and it was easy to attribute the cause to an extremist form of Catholicism. We turn now to Benjamin Labarie's 1979 work, Colonial Massachusetts, a history, which provides a more dispassionate, omniscient narrative of the Massachusetts colony, one informed by over 350 years of hindsight. By the 20th century, it was well appreciated that the people who were to become known as the Pilgrims originated as an extreme sect of Puritans termed separatists, all right? They were extremists. They had migrated under the leadership of their minister, John Robinson, example, Reuben, the son of Reuben, Robinson, Reuben, that's where the Robinson is coming, Reuben, to Amsterdam in the Netherlands in 1607, and then moved on to Leiden. In 1606, Sir Ferdinando Gorges, or again, remember that's Jorge in Spanish for George, and Ferdinando is obviously a Spanish given name. Ferdinando, that's Hernando, Ferdinando Cortez, right? And Sir John Popham. So remember, they're trying to tell you that this guy, Ferdinando Gorges or Jorges, is an English guy. Just look at his name. Nobody really questioned that before. And Sir John Popham, both wealthy Englishmen, right? They're supposed to be Englishmen, formed an alliance of interest with Richard Hallioke. Remember, this is a Moorish name, to persuade King James I to charter the Virginia Company. They persuaded King James, hey man, you got to do it. They persuaded him. One portion of this charter granted the company the right to colonize between the 38th and 45th parallels. This territory was given to a group termed the Plymouth Company, under the command of Raleigh Gilbert, Humphrey's son, and George Popham, English crypto-Jewish. John Popham's nephew, after an attempt to colonize the coast of Maine, failed in 1607. The Virginia Company was set up in 1608 in a location substantially farther south. By a chain of coincidences and accidental events, most of the Puritans originally scheduled to board the Mayflower for a second attempt at colonizing the North Atlantic coast were unable to make the voyage. The consequence was that, as Labarie states, the majority of the Pilgrims were not even Puritan religious descendants per se. Remember, right? A lot of them, only 30 of them were. There's 102, and we already just got the story of how, more than half were indentured servants. They were just persons willing and able to board the Mayflower and head west. They just had no other choice. They really wanted to come to America, a lot of them. All right, so now it's going to give a list. It says here, passengers of the Mayflower, it says here, or aboard the Mayflower. It says John Carver, Catherine Carver, Desiree Minster, John Hoban. All right, so this is a list. Go ahead and, hit pause and look at all the names. If you recognize any, these surnames or anything like that, so you can have it. Now it says here, there are several puzzling details in this roster. First, 3 unaccompanied children, surnamed Moore, right? They're Moore, right? And they have no parents, are living with 3 different families. Jasper Moore is with the Carvers, a family group that also includes a Desiree Minter and Roger Wilder, 2 Ashkenazic named persons. Richard Moore is listed with the Brewster family and their children. Ellen Moore is with the Winslow family, which also includes George Sole, Sephardic name, and Elias Story, likely from Asturia, a heavily Sephardic region of Spain, or a region called Stora in Morocco. All right, Stora. Second, the Hopkins family contains children named Giles, French, Constanta, Latin, Damaris, Tamar, Hebrew, and Oceanus, Latin, and is accompanied by an Edward Doughty, the Sephardic diminutive for David or Dawidi, Dawidi, Daoti, Dawidi. All right. So what's his point? That these are all supposed to be English Puritans. What's up with all these names from all these different parts and ethnicities, right? Third, the Tilley family includes Henry Sampson, which is Hebrew. And finally, among the unmarried adult male passengers, we find Moses Flesher, John Goodman, Ashkenazi for Shem, Toph, Diggory priest, Kohan, Richard Gardiner, Jardine, and Thomas English. Jews often took their country of residence as a surname. Thus, we believe a strong prima facie can be made for the likely presence of many Sephardim and Moors among the Plymouth passengers. All right, if you actually do research and verify what he's saying, you're gonna end up with the same results. What he's saying. Massachusetts Bay Company. All right. Continuing the book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, a genealogical history. We're on chapter 4 in this video. All right. And it says here, a later incorporation under the auspices of the Council for New England obtained a royal grant for all land lying between 40 degrees and 48 degrees north latitude. By 1628, this venture coalesced into the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It was intended to be a stock company financed by merchants that included Matthew Cradock, Sir Richard Saltonstall, and John Venn. Thus, in June 1628, John Endicott brought 50 initial settlers to Salem. Then in March 1630, John Winthrop led a fleet of 11 ships carrying 700 passengers. 7 ships, 700 passengers, plus cows, horses, and supplies. And I'm sure a lot of those were indentured service that ended up working in plantations. They were colored people, and they ended up being called so-called Negroes in history. Soon after that, 6 more ships arrived, bringing the total number of Massachusetts Bay colonists to 1,200 by 1630. They brought 1,200 people. The signatories of 1629 charter were Matthew Cradock to be the first present governor of the said company, and the said Thomas Goffey to be deputy governor of the said company, and the said Sir Richard Saltonstall, Isaac Johnson, Samuel Aldersey, John Venn, John Humphrey, John Endicott, Simon Whitcomb, Increase Noel, Richard Perry, Nathaniel Wright, Samuel Vassall, Theophilus Eaton, Thomas Adams, Thomas Hutchins, John Brown, George Foxcroft, William Basil, and William Pinchon. Pinchon. I already know that goes back to Spain. Several of these persons bear Ashkenazic or Sephardic surnames. Example, Goffey is Welsh and borders Jewish. Saltonstall, Van, Endicott, Noel, Perry, Basil, Eaton, Adams, Brown, and Pinchon. As Labarre observes, and contrary to popular belief, most of the Massachusetts Bay colonists made no claim to being Puritans or religious adherents of any shape, sort, or fashion. See, they weren't calling themselves Puritans. That's deep. Listen. They had simply immigrated to make their fortunes in the New World. The Hutchinson family, we've done a genealogy on that, and I think we've ran into these same people. For example, traded with the West Indies. The Hutchinsons traded with who? The West Indies through their cousin, Peleg Sanford. Peleg, right? That's one of Eber's son. Peleg, that's Hebrew, of Rhode Island. Other Boston-based merchants, right? Merchants, who's the merchants traded with the crypto-Jewish strongholds of Bilbao, Portugal, Malaga, Spain, and the Marrano communities. Listen, Marrano, these are Moors and Sephardic Jews. They own all these ships and trades. They're the merchants, right? And the Marrano communities of the Canaries, the Madeira, and Fayal. Some had factors at Converso, Leyden, Nevis, Barbados, it's all conversos, same people, Antigua, Guadeloupe for trading in rum, wine, and sugar. Who was holding it down? These were all colored people holding it down. By 1645, Boston vessels were transporting African slaves to Barbados. All right, so dodge the hijack, because if they're coming from Boston and they're going to Barbados, why are they saying they're African? Now we know the backstory, right? We know the backstory. Who were they getting rid of in New England at that time, right? A lot of these Wampanoag, Pequot, Narragansett, Shinnecock, a lot of these New England, Iroquois, a lot of these, Northeast tribes, they were sent into West Indies, not Africans, dodged the hijack. And by 1664, a man named John Leverett, bearing the Hebrew surname, was governor of the colony, which in the meantime had outgrown and now overshadowed the earlier Plymouth colony, leaving Massachusetts dominated politically and ideologically by Boston and its merchants. In Appendix F are listed the given and last names of the original Massachusetts-based settlers. The list contains a vivid cross-section of Sephardic and Moorish nomenclature. Abel is Hebrew, as are Adams and Agar. Alger is Moorish for Algeria. Elizabeth Ballard, child is named Shubael, Hebrew. Jacob Barney bears Hebrew given and surnames. William Barsham's name means son of Shem. Barsham, right, son of Shem. Barsham. Samuel Bass, Byzantine Greek for king. Also a Spanish Jewish surname, all right, Bass, is married to Anne Seville or Seville. Edward Bendel and John Benham both carry Hebrew surnames, as do the Benjamin brothers. Henry Bright's wife is Beriah, Hebrew. Abraham Brownie, designating a brown complexion, is surveyor, a Jewish Moorish dominated trade. All right, that's deep right there, because all these surveyors, these original colonial surveyors, I already knew the drop. I found many of them to be Moors and Sephardic Jews, but this is literally letting you know that it was mainly Moorish people doing this type of profession. Who were they hiring when they were surveying these new colonies, these new lands? They were bringing Moors to survey the land, a Jewish Moorish dominated trade, a Jewish Moorish dominated trade. Again, dodge the hijack with these whitewashed images. They're letting you know the drop right next to it, brown complexion Moorish, and they're showing this. There is no other images. They've never really given us the real images. We would have to draw or depict our own, and that's what we are going to do, based on the real descriptions. Richard Bulgar is likely a Sephard from then Ottoman-held Bulgaria. There is also a Jehu Bernard Capon, and his wife, Ruth, have a Hebrew anagram surname, Capon. William Cheesebro, children bear the names David, Hebrew. Andronicus, Greek. Junia, Latin. Jabez, Hebrew. Elijah, Hebrew. John Cotton's surname was likely anglicized from the Hebrew Arabic Katon, or small. William Doughty bears the Hebrew Arabic diminutive for David as a surname, Doughty, David. Edward Elmer's surname translates to the sea, Elmer, or the Mar, El Mar, right, the sea, the ocean. George Farr's surname would be rendered Far, Phar, in Arabic, great, mighty. Samuel Freeman carries a common Ashkenazic appellation. Robert Gamlin likely had his surname shortened from the Hebrew Gamelin. Joshua Hughes married a Mary Goldstone, and onward through the list. Cues and clues of non-Christian, non-English origins of the Massachusetts Puritans grow increasingly evident. All right, non-English origins of these so-called Puritans. LaBarry knows that it was the Huguenots, right, who brought the Jewish Moorish craft of silver work. And who? The Huguenots. Who's the Huguenots, Kurimeo? Well, we did a whole 5-hour video on them and many other videos. They're Moors. They're the Moors who got expelled from Spain and Portugal. They settled in southern France. They became known as Huguenots. They followed Calvinism, or John Calvin, who was a crypto-Jew. We've already broke this down before. Yeah, the Huguenots, right? Huguenot. People get mad when I say it like that. It's Huguenot, Kurimeo. All right, it's Huguenot. Among the best known were Jeremiah Dumas, John Connie, and Paul Revere. These were Moors. Paul Revere. Yeah, the redcoats are coming. That was a Moor. He was a Huguenot. All three of these bear French Sephardic surnames. Another culturally prominent settler was Nathaniel Ames, medieval English Jewish surname from Amos, who simultaneously practiced medicine, ran a tavern, and published an almanac. Even the man with whom Paul Revere wrote to warn the British arrival for war in 1775 bore a Sephardic surname, Dawes. The Dawes Rose, remember, that means David, as already pointed out, a derivative of David, the David Rose, the Dawes Rose, the David, the Sephardic. They named it after a colored person. The names of some physicians practicing in Boston in 1760, 1775 are also informative. They include Abijah Cheever, probably Chiver, Cipher, or John Homans, probably Homem, Naya Dowd or David, Nahuja Fry, Ashkenazic, Sylvester Gardines, Joseph Gardner, Thomas Matthew, Joshua Levite or Levite, John Sprague, Dutch speaker of foreign tongue, Samuel Adams, Charles Carvis, Gervais, John Jeffries, Arabic Jafar, Jean Ferron for iron, Thomas Cass, Arabic Isaac Rand, Joseph Caliph, John Cronenschelt, Ashkenazic, Edmund Dana, Spanish, George Emery, Amir, William Gager, German Jagger, Hunter, Joshua G, Hebrew letter, Giles Hill, discussed in chapter 1. All right, remember, go get the video. James Gerald, Ebenezer Roby, diminutive for Reuben, and Levi Shepherd, that is Sephard. All right, we continue in the book Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, a genealogical history regarding the Pilgrims and the Puritans and their true genealogy. No one can deny that Massachusetts religious practices had some peculiar quirks, many of which we believe can be traced to underlying Judaic or Muslim practices. Appendix A and B in this book, right? They show it. Carla Gardina Pestana, for example, reports that Roger Williams, as minister of the Salem Church, advocated the veiling of women at worship service. Some Puritans became dissenters from the established church in Salem, forming splinter groups. These included Samuel Shatlock, Joshua Buffon, Samuel Gaskill, all carrying Sephardic names. One of the leaders of this new Quaker movement was John Copeland. All right, so look, a new Quaker movement. So John Copeland is one of them, from Hebrew Kopel, derived from Jacob, who arrived in Salem from England in 1656. Two other prominent Quakers of the period were Nathaniel Sylvester and Eliakim Wardell, both bearing Sephardic given and last names. Still, other heretics were Baptist. Pestana reports that one minister, Thomas Gould, German for money or gold, as already discussed, liked to read Chronicles 1:2 to his congregation. Let him kiss me with kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. This is an Old Testament passage central to the liturgy of the Kabbalat service of Jews, which welcomes the Sabbath as the bride or delight of the bridegroom. Sung Friday at dusk to an ancient Moorish melody. All right, this is sung to an ancient Moorish melody as part of the service is the hymn Lacha Dodi, Come, My Beloved, composed in the 16th century by Rabbi Shlomo Halevi Alskabetz, next to the Shema and the words Baruch Ata Adonai, This is probably the most familiar part of Jewish Sabbath services. It is not found in Christian services. Continuing, in agreement with crypto-Jewish practice, endogamy among the Massachusetts Quaker settlers was carried to extremes. In one case, Pestana reports 6 intermarried families accounted for fully two-thirds of the more than 500 people known to have been members of the Salem monthly meeting. All right, you hear that they were marrying themselves, having, guys with different wives, and those wives marrying other guys, and. Among these congregants were Benjamin Bagnell, Sarah Flood, Bassett, and the Estes family. All bear Sephardic surname. A listing of the early settlers in Salem is given in Appendix F. Of these, several would appear to be French Huguenot or Sephardic. Huguenots or Sephardies, all colored people. For example, John Abbey, Aramaic fathers. John Barrow, Baruch. Edward Bucamp, Roger Conant, Jeffrey Esty, Thomas Gardner, Jardine, Edward Giles, Thomas Goldthwait, Robert Goodell, Henry Herrick, John Horn, after the Jewish shofar, Alice Egerson, George Jacobs, Elijah Kibbe, Richard Ober, Samuel Perez, all right, from Nehemiah 11:4, Richard Raymond, Daniel Ray, John Swayze, for John Sweet for sugar or candy, a Jewish Arab monopoly. Yup, we know who started the sugar plantations, right? Let's not forget the previous presentations. John Simmons, and Abraham Temple. Non-Christian have been acknowledged even in traditional histories to have been present in Massachusetts from very early date. Historian T.H.H. Breen, for example, quotes a colonist named Roger Clapp, who hoped that Massachusetts would knit together the heart of all who feared God, whether rich or poor, English or Indian. Portugal, example, Sephardic Jewish or Negro, whether Portuguese, meaning whether he was Negro, whether he was Portuguese, meaning whether he was Negro, because Portuguese were Negroes. Others alluded to social distinctions between Christians and Turks, example, Muslims and Sephardics, heathens, barbarians, and infidels, confirming that such groups were socially recognized in the ranks of the colonists. All these people were there. In the early 16th century, there were more Englishmen living in Muslim North Africa than Massachusetts and Virginia together. England had signed a trade treaty with Morocco in 1580. There was a Muslim community in London and Plymouth, and it was not unusual for Englishmen to turn Turk. All right, for Englishmen to turn what? Turk. It was not unusual, people being called Turks. A lot of these colonists, listen, this is deep, and take up residence in North Africa in the service of some Muslim potentate, even converting to Islam. The Caribbean trade triangle is familiar to most students of colonial history, but it is not generally known that the most dominant triangle linked England to Moorish North Africa and North America. Before the Mayflower carried the so-called pilgrims, right, to Plymouth, it had traded in the Muslim Mediterranean. Such adventurers and promoters as George Sandys, William Strachey, Sir Thomas Roe, Ralph Lane, John Smith, George Carteret, founder of New Jersey, John Pori, Sir Thomas Smith of Smythe, Sir Thomas Arundel, John White were in North Africa before they went to America. You hear all these colonists that were so-called pilgrims, they were what? They were at some point in North Africa. What's going on? The ties between England and North Africa were as strong as her antipathy was toward Spain. You guys got to remember that before King James took over, Queen Elizabeth had a big alliance with the Sultan of Morocco. They were splitting up the colonies for their sugar plantations. She took the north and he took the Caribbean or the south, the tropical regions. Remember, we've read this before. An orientation enthusiastically endorsed by Sephardic Jews, for whom Morocco had been one of their first places of refuge after expulsion from the Iberian Peninsula. Remember, it wasn't vice versa. They didn't go from Morocco to Spain, they went from Spain to Morocco. Yet another category included Papists, example, Catholics. The latter, especially those identified with Spain, were commonly depicted as arch enemies of England and its colonies. Denouncers include Lord Saye and Seal, as well as those refugees from the Iberian Peninsula, presumed here to be Sephardic or Muslim fellow travelers of the Puritans. Interestingly, Breen singles out a certain faction of settlers who were especially liberal in their religious views and who were heavily intermarried with one another. And it says here, Thomas Clark and William Tyne were champions of a wider toleration. Clark would go so far in 1658 as to protest with Edward Hutchinson the harsh laws passed against the Quakers, and Tyne with Leverett objected to the Cambridge Platform. Valentine Hill, a landowner and trader to the eastern parts, was connected to the Hutchinson family because his first wife, Frances Freestone, was a cousin of William Hutchinson. Hill's second wife, Mary Eaton, a daughter of Theophilus Eaton of New Haven, connected him through her stepmother, Anne Eaton, to David Yale, Anne Eaton's son, a Boston merchant who agitated with Robert Child for a more flexible form of Puritanism. Francis Norton came to the New World initially as an agent for the Mason family of New Hampshire, rather than as a devoted Puritan. He gravitated towards Sedgwick's more expansive vision of Puritanism and was married to Mary Stetson, the daughter of Sedgwick's partner in Charlestown, Cider Mill. Joshua Hughes, nephew of the prominent English merchant and ironmonger Joshua Foote, was involved closely in business dealings with Edward Hutchinson and other tolerationist forces in the colony. Finally, Robert Child himself, also an investor, became infamous as the author of the pro-tolerationist Remonstrance of 1546. All right, so that was something somebody was saying back then. It says these patterns of interwoven business, religious, and marital bonds are typical of crypto-Jewish communities, and we believe they help to perpetuate a private form of religious practice within the community that endured from generation to generation. Meaning, since they were all crypto-Jews, that nobody snitched on each other. Meaning that since they were all crypto-Jews or crypto-Moors, none of them were snitching on each other. They were able to hold this secret and practice secretly. Gloucester and Ipswich, it says here. A 1984 study of Christine Harman focuses on two Massachusetts maritime communities. She starts by discussing a late 17th century minister, the Reverend John Wise, who supplemented the income from his farm with returns from his investments in two trading vessels. One of his sons, Joseph, set up as a shoekeeper in Boston, and another son, Ami Ruhama, became a major merchant in Ipswich. All right, Ami Ruhama. That sounds so Muslim, right, or Arab. And he was there in the 1700s as one of the major merchants in Ipswich, in Massachusetts. Right, in 1721, the same Reverend Wise compared Gloucester, a flourishing center of the fishery, to the ancient biblical seaport of Tyre. Listen, Gloucester, he compared it to the biblical Tyre. All right, you've seen my recent videos of the Chaldeans in Ireland, right? And the Phoenicians going over there, becoming Britons. Where were the Phoenicians coming from? Canaan. I've already told you Phoenicians were coming over here. Tyre was one of those ancient Phoenician cities. So maybe All right, something to dig into. All right, that was but a rock, it says here, Tyre. Yet by merchandise became the queen of the seats, the metropolis of the world. This description raises several questions. First, why does a Puritan minister have the Jewish surname Wise? Good question. All right, that's the first question. Second question, why does this Puritan minister, ostensibly from a sect that eschews materialism, laud the value of commerce and operate not only a farm but two trading ships? All right, so I guess that's what they were saying earlier, that the profession and what these people were doing does not fit the descriptions of these so holy Puritans that weren't about material stuff or gaining wealth. But these people, these so-called Puritans and Pilgrims who were really arriving, these were all, a lot of them were merchants. They were all about the business, all about that money bag. Shout out to Bag for What's Mine. All right, it's all about that money bag. So why would they be operating not only a farm but two trading ships if they weren't about the money bag? Third question, right? Why does this same purportedly Christian minister use the ancient biblical city of Tyre as a metaphor for his congregation's locale? And finally, why would such a minister have a son bearing the Muslim appellation of Ami Ruhama? Clearly, there was more going on in colonial Massachusetts than traditional history books have recounted. They lied to us, all right? They left all this out. We didn't really ask questions. They probably never told us about Ami Ruhama. But why would he name his son an Arab name? All right? And why would they be caring so much about making money, these so-called Puritans? Gloucester, Massachusetts was built upon its position as a leading cod fishing entrepot, trading with the Marrano dominated areas of the Caribbean, Spain, and Portugal. The Moorish dominated areas. Moors was not the white man, was not Columbus and the white man. All right, Columbus was the Marrano. Columbus is the Jew. He is the so-called black man that you're calling white. This was a Marrano dominated area, the Caribbean, Spain, and Portugal. Among the most successful of the town's entrepreneurs were Miller Jacob Davis and Tanner Isaac Eveleth. Other residents included Christian Marshman, De Soto in Spanish, Marshman, De Soto. That's what Marshman means, and that's what De Soto means, a Marshman. William and Naomi Sargent and Jonathan Springer. Springer held partial interest in Four Small Slopes, together with Quakers John Molly and Walter Newberry. Contrary to their modern-day image of modesty and simplicity, Christine Harman comments that Quakers were typically viewed as unscrupulous, litigious sharpsters by the other early Massachusetts settlers, a description not inconsistent with anti-Semitic stereotypes of the day. All right, and we continue in the book Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, a Genealogical History by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. Again, we're continuing in chapter 4. This part of chapter 4 says witchcraft. Oh no, witchcraft, right? Remember Salem witchcraft and how they were trying to blame the Arawak Tituba for being the main witch? Well, it's interesting. Let's see what they got to say about witchcraft here. A defining attribute of the Massachusetts colony was the phenomenon of witchcraft. This type of panic broke out much more frequently in New England than the other colonies. One writer finds that more than 95% of all accusations and 90% of death sentences occurred among the Puritans. The reason most often given is the provincial Anglican origin of Puritans. The eastern counties of England had the highest number of witchcraft cases. This may be only half the story, though, for there appears to be a xenophobic aspect to witch hunting in both Massachusetts and places like Essex, England. All right, so let's see what they're going to tell us. So the town of Gloucester experienced several charges of witchcraft against both ministers and townspeople. In Salem, of course, the witchcraft hysteria had begun in 1692. Three daughters of William and Johanna Blessings, example Baruch, Town, Sarah Chloe's, Mary Esty, and Rebecca Norris, Arabic for light, were accused, arrested, examined, and either imprisoned or executed on charges of scandalous evil and miscarriage inconsistent with Christianity. Sarah alone escaped punishment after obtaining high-powered legal counsel and moved to Framingham, where she and her husband were eventually counted among the town's most illustrious citizens, so she survived. It is likely that the charges were motivated by jealousy of the town's family's wealth, attitudes perhaps not unmixed with anti-Semitism. All right, listen to what's going on. Who they were condemning as witches, not just Tituba and the Indians, but these Sephardic Moorish people. They didn't want them. They were jealous of their wealth. In Ipswich, witchcraft charges were first directed only toward those in the community already viewed as deviant. Martha Carrier, Mary Parker, and Samuel Wardwell, but they soon spread to encompass nearly 40 Andoverians who were all solid and respectable members of the community, the wife of Deacon John Fry, wife of Militia Captain John Osgood, two of the Reverend Francis Dane's daughters, his daughter-in-law and several grandchildren, and the wife of Dudley Bradstreet. The defendants pleaded guilty to several charges, including rebaptism by Satan himself, who preferred full immersion to sprinkling in the Shoskin River, which sounds much like the Judaic mikvah bathing ritual. That's deep. See what they're saying? They were saying that these people were witches because they were literally baptizing themselves just like the Jews were doing in rivers. They were calling it rebaptism by Satan himself. So you see who's these witches, right? Anybody they wanted to get rid of, whether it was Tituba, the Indian, the Arawak, right? Or whether it was these Sephardic Moorish peoples. And these were probably Catholics doing it. Arrested in Gloucester were Elizabeth Dicer, Margaret Prince, Judeo-Arabic surname Amir, Phoebe Day Diaz, and Frances Norwood. As Herman notes, many of the accused were Quakers, viewed by the Puritans as heretics. In addition to the Quaker affinities of Rebecca Nurse, she mentions the Proctor family, of which 5 members, John, his wife Elizabeth, and 3 children were charged with witchcraft, even the children. What made the Proctors suspect in the eyes of their neighbors, she speculates, was less that John ran a tavern on the Ipswich Road than that his wife's family, the Bassetts of Lynn, included a large number of Quakers. This is simply the reason. This is what they were doing. Joining the Proctors in prison were 2 members of the Bassett family, along with 4 members of Lynn's, Hawks, Farrar, and Hart families. Remember, Farrar is Muslim, for Fares, all whom had Quaker connections and bore solid Sephardic surnames. So this is deep. This is what I've been letting you know. Quaker, again, just like Protestant, a lot of these Quakers were just crypto-Jews, crypto-Muslims. Quakers just another tag, remember. They just don't want to be Catholics. And they can't be declared Muslims or Jews. The same was true of Andover residents Samuel Wardwell, a relative of the Quakeress Lydia Wardwell. Ward, Arabic for rose, plus the suffix L, right? L, Ward, and L, that's 2 Arabic surnames, who appeared naked in the Newbury Meeting House to protest persecution by the Puritans in 1663. Among those accused of witchcraft later in the trial were a large number of people who shared with Rebecca Nurse the same kind of indirect Quaker links of kingship and friendship with religious dissidents, all right? They were getting rid of their so-called Quakers, right? The cryptos. Another accused witch, Job Tukey, or Tuhi, already discussed, of Beverly, was at pains to refute charges that his father, an English clergyman, was an Anabaptistical Quaking rogue that for his maintenance went up and down England to delude souls for the devil. And at least one instance in Salem, an accusation of witchcraft figured as a way for an afflicted girl to dissociate herself from the Quaker community. Ann Putnam Jr. described to the court how An old gray headman, whom people used to call Father Pharaoh, tormented her by insisting that he was her grandfather. The old man, whom Ann Putnam publicly denied as a blood relative, was Thomas Farrar, Sr., the father of a leading Lynn Quaker. Shortly after the trials, one of Salem's chief friends, Thomas Mawley, hinted that some linkage existed between dissenting affinities and the witchcraft prosecutions, comparing the trials to the Quakers' sufferings and expressing relief that none of his relations had been charged. Others alleged witches include George Jacobs Sr. and Giles Corey. Harman continues, testimony on behalf of John and Elizabeth Proctor, signed by several of their Quaker neighbors, probably helped to seal their fate. And when the condemned witch Sarah Good stood on the scaffold, she threatened Salem's assistant minister Nicholas Noyes, if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink. We believe that many, perhaps most, of those accused of witchcraft were actually secret Judaizers, right? Cryptos. Talking about people of color here. Whereas their practices may have been successfully hidden or winked at from others in their often remote home villages in England, acts of burning candles, kosher slaughtering, house cleaning rituals, and the like were unfamiliar to the majority of their new neighbors. So listen to what's going on. The Massachusetts Collective branded their behavior as beyond the pale. Sarah Good's bloody curse, for example, makes the most sense when viewed from the Jewish prescription against consuming blood of any kind. In most of Christian Europe, at this time, blood puddings and black blood sausages were commonplace foods, although significantly this was not the case in Scotland, with its large population of Jews and crypto-Jews. All right, where? In Scotland. Scottish, Scotland, right? Cash root of a sort must still have been alive in parts of England. In our view, it is likely that at least part of the heretical appearance of the Quaker sect was due to the fact that a large portion of the membership was drawn from Sephardic Jews and Moors. Of course, there were congregants and ministers among the Puritans who also were very likely of Sephardic descent. Example, Samuel Parris and Nicholas Noyes. The Quakers were set apart from the Puritans in Massachusetts, not only by virtue of their religious practices, but also by their international business connections and greater financial acumen. They were highly endogamous and self-sufficient as a community, both spiritually and financially. Sociological characteristics of the Sephardim, right? This was all what the Sephardim people, this was their culture. Harman writes, so close was the connection between sectarian membership and daily subsistence for some men that the sundering of ties to the Quaker community meant a loss of livelihood. Ostracized by the Fellowship for failure to attend meetings regularly, Richard Oakes, or Ox, Ashkenazic surname, of Marblehead, protested that the Friends had denied him for nothing and that they have ruined him and his family. The Salem meeting's ability to supply members' needs for relief, education, employment, and credit served to reduce the influence of both civil government and Orthodox society over the lives of the dissenters. All right, so that was from by Herman. Now it says, in some ways, the self-containment of the Quaker community gave the Puritan Congregationalists just what they wanted, as little as possible to do with religious dissidents. But on another level, the development of Quakerism from an anti-authoritarian aberration into an effective self-governing community made the sect threaten, for what the Quakers had created was not just an alternative to the Congregational church, but also to the local community itself. This pattern was analogous to those found among the numerous Sephardic communities after the Iberian diaspora. All right, this was again Sephardic Moorish culture. Even the ideology of religious persecutions within the Quaker community echoed that of these diasporic communities. Herman points out the Quaker fellowship was not just indifferent to geographic boundaries, its essential ethos was anti localistic. The Salem meeting not only limited and discouraged its members' engagement in the town community, but also fostered actively their antagonism to local society itself by the ritualized accounting and recounting of sufferance, obligations like paying the Puritan minister's rate, contributing to the Puritan meeting house fund, and participating in militia training that the Puritan Orthodox accounted as identifying badges of membership within the community. The Quakers styled as sufferance extracted from dissenters. The Salem meetings leading laymen made regular inspections of these losses and entered what friends suffered, when at whose hands, in a ledger, that it may not be forgotten, but that it may stand upon record for generations yet unborn to see how faithful friends took joyfully the spoiling of their goods for the answer of good conscience toward God. Those goods were ample. Most citizens within the Quaker community were extremely competent merchants and international traders. Even Quaker women were astute in business affairs and would, upon occasion, run their late husband's business, behaviors matching only those in the Sephardic Jewish community. Famously, there was Gracia de Nazi. All right, remember, that's a Jewish last name, and actually a title of Prince Jew title for the Moors, right? During Moorish occupation, the Jews, the Nazis were the Prince Jews under the Moorish occupation. The women who defied kings in the 16th century and took over after her husband's death the largest bank in Europe. All right, the largest bank in Europe. Who? Gracia de Nazi. Nazi. She was Jewish. The Jewish prophetess Deborah Ann, Huldah, and Hannah were popular namesakes among the Quakers, as were biblical heroines like Judith, Esther, Miriam. Puritans seemed to prefer docile names like Ruth, Abigail, Rachel, Sarah, and Rebecca. Of the entrepreneurial qualities of Quaker women, Herman writes, nor was Elizabeth Brownie the only woman in town involved in business. Miriam Gross, clearly an Ashkenazi surname, invested in a fishing vessel after the death of her merchant husband and continued his local trade. More reluctant about personally managing her legal affairs than Madame Brown, Miriam appointed her relative Captain John Stacy to act as her attorney. Widow Tabitha Woods took over her husband's tavern, and along with Captain John Stacy from Eustace, John Edgecombe and their Boston partner James Pitts owned a merchant ship, the Dragon. Quaker-run transports traded with Spain by using reshipment stations in England, Jersey Island, and Holland. These business, marital, and trading patterns are indications of crypto-Jewish presence in those Massachusetts townships that prospered the most, both socially and economically, during the 1600s to 1700s, all right? When we're talking about the original colonists, these are who they were. Since 2001, with the advent of DNA surname projects, we can go beyond the paper trail of genealogy. More than 2,000 of these genetic probes are underway, many devoted to regions or ethnic groups, for instance, Melungeons, rather than surnames. Selecting one of these at random from Massachusetts, the Chelsea DNA Project, we were struck, as was the project administrator, by the diversity of local Y chromosome pedigrees. True, the majority, 58% of male haplogroups or lineages were R1b, the leading type in Europe overall, especially on the Atlantic coast, but there were 8% E3b, considered North African, Middle Eastern, and Jewish haplogroups, sometimes called Moorish, E3% G, another minor Jewish type, believed to be Central Asian, 20% I, predominantly Scandinavian in origin, but imported also in Spain, 4% T, suspected to be Phoenician and recently proven to be the type of Thomas Jefferson, 5% J, the classic Jewish male type, including the family with the surname Cohen, and 2.5% R1A and Ashkenazi, including also Cohen. All right, so, we dodged the hijack with the DNA stuff. Continuing says Thomas Paine. Again, let's dodge the hijack with the whitewashed images. An examination of one of America's most influential citizens, the orator and patriot Thomas Paine, provides additional support for the surmise that there might have been a not inconsiderable number of Jewish and Muslim descended persons living in early Massachusetts. Paine was born on January 29, 1737, to a tradesman family residing about 75 miles from London. The family's surname is derived from pagan, païen, heathen, infidel, and as we have seen, it is instanced several times among Virginia colonists. Paine, Thomas' mother was Frances Cokie. Her father was a lawyer. His own father, Joseph, was a Quaker. There are no records of Thomas being baptized. Paine regarded himself as a Quaker, and according to Paine biographer Jack Fruchtman, hoped to be buried in their cemetery. He attempted to work as a corset maker, apprenticing himself to a John Peronis, all right, apprenticing, but soon abandoned this occupation to sail on the King of Prussia, a privateer commanded by a Captain Mendez. Mendez is a Sephardic surname, and Peronis seems to be an Italian form of the French Peroni. By age 22, Paine had acquired a close male friend, Cleo Rigman, Ashkenazic surname, and a wife, Mary Lambert, whose father was a custom tax collector. He himself became a tax collector, and an office which entailed collecting an internal customs duty mainly on alcoholic beverages, but also on salt, soap, tobacco, and other goods. He proved to be slipshod in this line of work, however, and was fired after a year. By 1766, he was back in London, where he worked at a Sabbath-keeping academy run by Daniel Noble or Norbel. Such an institution would have resembled a Jewish yeshiva. The governing master's name is distinctly Sephardic. By February 1768, he had returned to being a tax collector, this time in Lewes, Sussex, and sharply anti-Catholic town. Paine lodged at home of a tobacconist and grocery store owner, Samuel Olive, who had a decidedly Sephardic surname and occupation. In 1771, he married Olive's daughter, Elizabeth. One of the witnesses was Henry Verral, a colleague of the father, who also bears a Sephardic surname. In 1774, Paine, by now politically radicalized, sailed for Massachusetts, where he fell in with a group of revolutionary thinkers. Among them was Benjamin Rush of Philadelphia, a physician and writer. Rush came from Scotland and was an adherent of Calvinism, right? Sounds like a Huguenot, a theology having many affinities with Judaic thought. Now remember, Calvin, the founder, was a crypto-Jew. Another was David Rittenhouse, astronomer, an instrument maker, and yet another, George Clymer, a prosperous Philadelphia merchant, president of the Bank of Philadelphia. All right, these are Sephardic Jews. Later, a partner with financier Robert Morris in the Bank of North America. To judge a man by the company he keeps, Paine moved in a circle that had all the marks of Crypto-Judaism. All right, so we continue in the book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, A Genealogical History. And again, we're still in chapter 4. This part of chapter 4 says here, genealogical analysis. We have thus far examined some of the contemporaneous social relationships among the Massachusetts colony settlers, especially religious memberships, marital patterns, business dealings, and friendships. Such patterns provide a window into the social history of early decades. We turn now to a longitudinal analysis of some genealogies for persons involved in the colony, either as financial, political supporters in England or as founders of prominent colonial lineages. All right, this is deep right here. Given below is the genealogy of Lord Say or Saleh. Remember, that's almost like Salah, right? Salah, the son of Arphaxad, the dad of Eber, right? Salah, Salah, Saleh, Saleh, an ardent anti-Catholic English peer and strong supporter of the migration of Protestants to the Massachusetts colony. Who's the Protestants again? Protestants who we have demonstrated or attempted to demonstrate to contain significant amounts of Sephardic and Moorish, these Protestants, these Pilgrims, these Puritans, Moors ancestry. All right, so they have a table here. They're gonna go over a couple of tables. So I'm not gonna, just go ahead and look through it, And this is the genealogy of Lord Saye and Sele. All right, as you can see here. So you guys can pause this and see yourself. This is very interesting. This last name, Ursula Fermor, daughter of Richard Fermor. Fermor. Come on, how obvious is that? And so the table continues here with John Twistleton, so Elizabeth, William III Viscount Saye. So this is the whole Saye's genealogy. All right, and this is very historic, I guess. It says here the first thing we should take note of the Saye and Saleh lineage is that their surname was originally Fiennes. James Fiennes was a descendant of Royo, the ancestor of William the Conqueror, in the same bloodline as Machir or Narbonese king of the Jews. Remember, major drop right there. Shout out to 432 the Drop Nation, Con Drop, for the Forbidden Histories, America's Forbidden Histories book, and how he was talking about Machir, right here in America, Machir. We're talking about way back. It says here Charlemagne, the Scottish Sinclairs, and the kings of Jerusalem. Secondly, we should know that the primary ancestor was Treasurer of England, a post often held by Jews throughout Europe during this period. That's deep right there too. All right. When we reach the sixth Lord, Richard Fiennes, we learn that his wife is Ursula Fermor. Both her first and last names are indicative of non-English ancestry. The surname Fermor suggests graphically that her ancestry was Moorish and ironworking related. By the early 1600s, at the time of the Massachusetts colony founding, William Fiennes, the eighth Lord, has married Elizabeth Temple, a woman whose surname evokes Jewish ancestry. By the late 1600s, the title has passed to another line through the marriage of Mary Fiennes to John Twistleton. Yet we believe that the practice of Judaism, likely in crypto form, has still continued. That this is the case can be inferred from the marriage of Thomas James Twistleton to Anne Ashe, the daughter of Benjamin Ashe, for Ashe is another name strongly suggestive of Jewish affiliations. All right, so they're at least continuing marrying at least to each other, so they can keep continuing their traditions and practices together as a family at least. Massachusetts Levitt family. So this is, I guess, another table. It says we turn now to the genealogy of the Levitt family, a prominent Massachusetts lineage that is also likely Jewish in ancestry. Why? First, because the name Levitt is itself Hebrew signifying Levite, one from the tribe of Levi. England in 1524 did not have any Jews living openly as such, so the Levitt family was likely crypto-Jewish. Note that their naming pattern in England is English, example William, Elizabeth, not Hebrew or Mediterranean. Perhaps they have become sincerely Christian. Let's look what happens when the family arrives in the colonies. All right, so this is the table. It's going to start, I guess, by here, 1524, Nicholas Levitt. All right, and there's another one here, Thomas Levitt. Ralph Levitt died, married. All right, you can see the tables here. It says Thomas Levitt, having been born in England and immigrating to New Hampshire, then part of Massachusetts colony, marries a woman bearing a Ladino name Isabella, and has children, the couple names Hezron and Aretas, virtue. These are Hebrew and Greek names, respectively, and typical of Sephardic naming customs. They represent an abrupt departure from the previous 4 generations of Levitt names. It says Hezron Levitt. All right, that's the example. And another one, Hezron Levitt maintains this new ethnic name practice using Lydia, Greek, Moses, Abigail, and Sarah as names for his children, and carrying forward the James and John names. All right, I run into a lot in doing people's genealogy, these Hebrew names and all these colonial people. And again, we're reading the story of who these people are. Just want you guys to understand that. if you start finding this in your genealogy. It says here the Cushman line, Ashkenazic surname Cush. Cush, isn't that ham? Ashkenazic, it became, they mixed with the Cush, enters at this point with Thomas Cushman being the son of Robert Cushman and Sarah Levitt. Thomas and his wife, Mary Allerton, appeared to be consciously Jewish, naming their children Lydia, Isaac, Elkanah, and Eliezer. Her brother John Levitt follows this same pattern, marrying two Jewish surnamed women, Levitt and Gilman, and naming his children Israel, Samuel, Jeremiah, Abigail, and so forth. All right. I'm glad we're reading this because, this is what I run into almost in every instance when I get far back enough in these colonial people. They all have Hebrew names like this, Jeremiah, the whole 12 tribes, all the patriarchs, everything, every name they give their kid. Why would they do that? If it's not part of their culture, And there's again more examples here on the table. At this point, several family members have moved to Hingham, Massachusetts, a town shown to have harbored a crypto-Jewish community. Crypto-Jewish community. All right, generation 3, as you can see here at the table. And it says here the entry for Joseph Levitt above ties the family into Massachusetts witchcraft trials, which we have seen appear to reflect the reaction of crypto-Jewish religious practices. Okay, so it says Thomas Bradbury's grandmother, Mary Perkins, moved from Warwick, England to Amesbury, Mass. In the 1600s, here she was tried and convicted of witchcraft in 1692. Her execution was delayed when her husband and clergyman testified for her, and 117 of her neighbors signed a petition praising her character. They were getting rid of her because she was practicing in secret Judaism, crypto, not because she was a witch. All right, in more tables, generation 5 says this generation is perhaps the smoking gun, signaling the continuation of Judaism within the Cushman-Levitt family in the New World. Caleb Cushman, born and raised in the colonies, departs from Hebron, Israel in 1780, apparently making an aliyah on behalf of his family, perhaps the first in several hundred years. As discussed earlier, the given name Persis is Sephardic. It means from Persia. Persis, all right, so Persis came in the scene. It was adopted in honor of the matriarchs who produced the Babylonian exilarchs. That's deep. The Babylonian exilarchs, these were the Hebrews who were exiled in Babylon, right? When they went and took them, supposedly, right? And they took over their kingdom. And Daniel was writing his book as an exilarch. In addition to Ashkenazi given surnames of Jacob, Levitt's spouse, the given name Almira's marked them as Jewish. In the 7th generation, we encounter a Roxana, the name of Alexander's Persian wife, popular with Jews down the ages, often allegorized as Rosh Hashanah. All right, and then this is generation 7. Now it's going to talk about the Massachusetts Lowell family. Let us now take a look at the Lowell family of Massachusetts, about whom the saying goes, the Cabots speak only to the Lowells, and the Lowells speak only to God. We suspect that the God of the Lowells are speaking to is Hebrew, not Christian. Let us consider their genealogy. The first member of whom we have record is Percival Lowley, born in 1571, a successful merchant in England. Right, a merchant, again, whose profession is that? The relatively late date of 1571, his wife's name of Rebecca Hebrew, and his occupation as a merchant all suggest a possibility of Judaic heritage. This presumption is strengthened by the marriage of his daughter Joanna to John Oliver, this surname being of Sephardic origin. Further, John is an importer, meaning he has international trade connections. Lowell probably originates as Low, a French form of Levi, plus the theophoric L, so common in Anglo-Norman names. L, right? Anglo-Norman L. Why is L so common in Anglo-Norman names, huh? L, I thought it was a Muslim Arabic Moorish thing, huh? Moreover, according to medieval legend, the two Arthurian figures of Parsifal and Lancelot were Jewish. Ooh, now remember the drop we got on King Arthur the other day. King Arthur, remember, descendants of Arphaxad. Says in the entry below, we see that Gideon Lowell has married a Sephardic named woman, Miriam Sweet, This surname is one found among the Melungeons of Appalachia, right? The Melungeon Indians. Again, Melungeons have a lot of this genealogy. Gideon's son John was born in South Carolina in 1696 and married Rachel Sargent, a woman carrying Sephardic first and last names. All right. So just look at the tables of who they're talking about and their kid. And another one right here, another John Lowe, 1696. John Lowe in 1724. So see the marriage, partners, occupations, and child naming patterns of the Lowell family suggest, as with the Levites, that the family was well aware of their Jewish ancestry and acted in ways to preserve that heritage. Until the end of British rule, despite its small size, Massachusetts occupied the position of most populous and best governed of the colonies. Boston may not have answered to its billing as a hub of the universe in the eyes of the mother country, but it was the uncontested commercial and intellectual capital of the American colonies. It was the hub at that time. Boston is called the hub. Harvard College opened its doors in 1636. This is a future video. Harvard College, who was it really for? And what does it have to do with American Indians? Future video. The first book in English in North America were printed there, and the earliest American writers came from there. It is understandable that the rebellion against England was planned and launched there. All right, this is where it all happened. Later, it was Massachusetts that led the nation in the development of manufacturing and mechanized assembly lines, especially guns, engines, agricultural equipment, and armaments. Transcendentalism, the first distinctively American philosophy, arose in the circles of Boston Brahmins. The Boston Brahmins, I got a book on them. I got a book on the Boston Brahmins. All right, we're going to get into that in a future video, where a form of deism, not unlike the Averroism of Spanish Jews, had long been ingrained. And it was an accident that Massachusetts became the center of the abolitionist movement. You think that was a coincidence? The success of the so-called Massachusetts experiment in utopianism and American freedom itself can hardly be fortuitous, but rests firmly on the shoulders of the prominent families described in this chapter. It all happened, it went down. Massachusetts was the hub. Boston, all those things started in Boston, Massachusetts, because of these Sephardic Moorish colonists, the founders, these black Europeans. Even today, as Boston polishes its reputation as the Athens of America, having become the leader in the country's high-tech revolution, the city, ranked as sixth largest Jewish community, is far out proportion to its impact on American Jewry and America as a whole. Eli Wiesel, Louis Brandeis, Rabbi Levi Zishak, Horowitz, Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, Molly Pecan, Theodore H. White, Arnold Auerbach, Arthur Fiedler, Leonard Bernstein, Justin Kaplan, Edward Bernays, Oscar Hanlon, Barbara Walters, Mike Wallace, Leonard Nimoy, Ellen Goodman, Alan Dershowitz. One has only to drop the names of some new founding fathers and mothers who set the tone in contemporary culture to realize Massachusetts' pioneering qualities and social political prominence in American history are unchanged. All right, so again, this was chapter 4, Massachusetts, Pilgrims, Puritans, Jews, and Moors. And again, this was the book, A Genealogical History, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope it's clear who the Pilgrims are, who the Puritans were, you know, who these founders were in these first colonies. We already broke down Roanoke, we broke down Jamestown, we broke down Plymouth today a little bit, and you know, we're going to continue to break this down. I hope you see the pattern. I hope it's becoming a lot more clear to you guys. The history, the lies, the false narratives, and the correct history that we are, you know, finding out. This history that was hidden from us, that we're undigging, and a very important genealogical history, which is very important. Most important is that it might be in your genealogy. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Wow.